When I first came to Japan, I told you I worked for Fuji Xerox as a
Mm.
cross-cultural trainer. At the time, Fuji Xerox was the premier joint venture in Japan with Fuji Photo Film and Xerox of Britain. And they developed this department to do cross-cultural training for profit. Of course, they wanted to make money. They hired a bunch of foreigners. I was one of them. And one day, the president, Yotaro Kobayashi, who was really, really famous, completely fluent in English, British English, and he went to school at Wharton in Pennsylvania. He came to our office and everybody went to go hear him speak, but the foreigners were not allowed to hear him speak. So here we are teaching cross-cultural communication and how to integrate, but the foreigners aren't allowed to go hear the global president speak. And I was really furious at it. I said, "What hypocrisy are we dealing with? This is outrageous." I completely was young and inexperienced and naive, and I overreacted. But what I did was, I wrote a letter to the president's office, and that caused quite a storm. And it turned out that the president's office sent somebody to interview the foreign staff, but it turned into a witch hunt against me. And I was ostracized in the company, and I basically ended up having to quit.
May I have your attention, please?
Welcome to Real Gaijin, unveiling the real Japan, an American expat's inside look. Now it's time for another story from the Read My Lips series of podcasts. Summarized podcast.
Well, let's get started. Well, good morning in Japan and good afternoon to David, who's calling us from his home in Colorado, where it's 5 o'clock in the evening the previous day. I'm Mark Kennedy. I am the author and host of the Real Gaijin AMA podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we have a special guest, David Wagner, who has spent a lot of time in Japan. He started out as a reporter for a hometown newspaper, which is pretty big, and then he actually moved to Japan. We're going to hear all about that. He worked as a columnist for two large newspapers in Japan. He's produced programs and appeared on them in NHK, which is the national broadcaster. And plus, on top of all of this, he's written something like 24 books on doing business in Japan and run a very successful consulting business and coaching business for how to be an effective business coach, business communications coach, and how to use business communications effectively in Japan. So we'll learn all about this. So David, welcome to joining us on today's show.
Thank you. Nice to virtually meet you finally, Mark.
It's my pleasure. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started here. We'll jump right into it in just a second. But this is a live chat. So this means that you can use the chat functionality at the bottom of your screen or to the right of the screen. Put in comments, questions, whatever. I'll monitor that while David is speaking, and we'll get the questions to David right away. You can ask him anything. This is an AMA, Ask Me Anything. Also, I'll get the full recording out by Substack and YouTube within about 24, 36 hours. Give me a little bit of time and we'll take care of that. All right, let's get right into it. David, take us back. How did you go from Denver to Japan?
Okay, we got to go back to 1982. I was a college student in a school in Colorado called Fort Lewis College, which had an exchange program with Kansai Gaidai in Osaka. And there was a professor there that I really respected who was teaching Japanese history. And I decided to go at his suggestion to see what it's like in Japan. And as soon as I was there in a homestay family, I did the classic homestay family and had a wonderful experience, really fell in love with Japan. And that started the course for really the next 40 plus years.
Wow, that sounds eerily familiar to my own experience, although you preceded me by a little bit. So an older brother, so to speak, or brothers by a
Sure.
different mother, huh? All right, good.
Yeah.
And so what happened after that?
So, in advance of Japan, I had already planned to go for a year to school in France, in Paris at the Sorbonne. And I left Japan and went to Paris for a year and studied French. But, I mean, Paris is wonderful. France was terrific. But it was not where my heart lied. And Japan did something to me in the month that I was there. And I started steering a course toward going back to Japan, finished up my undergrad degree in Asian history and went to get a master's degree at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California, focusing on Japanese policy study. The odd thing is, even though I studied policy, I ended up working for Fuji Xerox as a cross-cultural trainer in between year one and year two of my master's course. And they offered me a job upon graduation, and I took it. And I stayed there for about 3 years, completely different story. And then I ended up going back to the States for a couple of years and went back to Japan and stayed from 1993 pretty much until last year. I came
Oh,
back and lived in Denver
wow.
a couple of times, but most of my time was spent the last 35 years in Japan. Um, so I got a permanent residency in Japan and I did the whole thing. But you get older and you got to look at the future, and your parents get older and you've got to make some decisions. And
Uh,
so I decided to come back and move back to my hometown of Denver last year.
I see. Okay. And so, how did you become a newspaper reporter?
So one of the wonderful things about Japan is, especially when I was there were not a lot of foreigners and not a lot of foreigners being assertive. And I found Japan and one of the things I started doing on my free time on the weekends was writing editorials and sending them to letters to the editor to the Mainichi Daily newspaper. And after 6 months, every time I sent one in, it was the old way of doing it by mail or fax, I don't remember. And every time,
They could still
yeah,
do that here.
well, yeah, some people do. Every time I sent one in, the editor published it. So every 2 weeks for 6 months, they published every single thing I wrote. And I called him up. I tracked him down and I said, "Why don't you give me my own column?" That's it.
Oh,
My
well,
own
there
column.
you go. You don't get unless you ask. Very good.
You shall receive. And he gave me my own column. And I have my own column in the Mainichi Daily News on US Japanese relations for 2 years every week. And then what happened, that ended, and I went to the Daily Yomiuri with another idea, which was to do one on business communications. So I wrote, I think that one was every 2 weeks for 2 years. Then I took
Oh,
the Daily Yomiuri art of 2 years and I put them in kind of a book form. And I went
uh,
to a publisher and I said, I've got an idea for a book, and here's the book. It's called Kokusai Business Skill. And this is from
yes, we can
19,
see it.
everyone can see it.
Yes.
That's from 1997. So it's 30 years ago. So then I got my first book published and I published a couple
Oh,
more. And then I had another idea. I just kept coming up with ideas. I said, why don't I make a TV show on NHK Educational of how to do good communication with particularly Americans, but Westerners in general, although they're very different styles. And NHK, I called up NHK one day. I got some, office lady on the phone, hi, nan deshoka, NHK de gozaimasu. And I said, I have an idea for a TV show. Who can I talk to? So she connected me with a producer. And I talked with this producer and I said, I want to make a TV show. Are you interested? He goes, sure. So come on in. So I go
this is
into,
too easy.
yeah, it was great. That's exactly how it happened. And I went in and we talked for 4 months, designed the show, and they gave me my own TV show. It was extraordinary, not only because I could do that, but with TV shows and that kind of entertainment sector, you're supposed to have somebody to represent you who negotiates on your behalf,
Ah,
right? I said,
that.
no, I don't really want to do that. I'm just going to go directly and give it a try. And it worked.
Wow.
I don't know if you could do those kinds of things now. Probably you still can, but there's a lot more competition to do all kinds of things in Japan with
Yeah.
a lot of non-Japanese of 3% of the population, right? I think back in, you know, 3 years ago, it was still under 1%, I think, of the population.
That's a good point. Wow.
So,
Well, all right.
and a land of opportunity. I could do so many wonderful things in Japan during my entire 35 years there. I really had a good experience. Yeah.
So maybe during or after this NHK program, did you write more books?
Yeah, so I kept writing. And when you're on NHK, what happens is all the publishers want to use your fame and to sell books. This was again right before the internet really took off and everything went
Yeah, right.
virtual. So I had at the peak, I had 9 publishers publishing my
Oh,
books. Some of the big ones, PHP, DHC, um, even Nova. Remember Nova? I did a couple books with
yeah.
Nova. I did a couple with Johann. Johann went out of business. I did 2 with what was it? Kodansha International. They went out of business. I guess my books didn't sell enough for them. But
Mm,
I also wrote some books on my own in ebook form, and I put them all in ebook form a couple of years ago, almost 10 years ago,
yeah.
and basically give them away. I charge a couple dollars a book. I just want people to use them as a resource.
Mm,
Um, so again, that was another thing. If you are assertive in Japan and you want to break the rules without doing anything illegal, right? There's a lot you can do. It's sky's the limit. That's my feeling anyway.
well, that has certainly worked. And then, so how, you must have leveraged this experience. Great coffee cup, by the way,
Oh,
to yes, we see where your heart is, and with the kakejuku and behind you.
yeah.
So, how did you then get into the consulting or coaching business?
Well, the first job I had, I told you, was in 1987 for 3 years with Fuji Xerox. They had a training business to teach Japanese how to be international. And
Mm,
they were training mainly young managers to go overseas and learn how to style shift and do things properly and effectively. And it took a lot of training because Japanese are very generally indirect. Maybe in Osaka they're not so indirect, but Japanese are
right.
indirect. There's all kinds of cultural norms that are very different in Japan. One of the ones I always tried to work with them on was Ishin Denshin, which is basically telepathy. You know,
Yeah.
you know somebody so well that you send nonverbal messages and they pick up your cues. It's actually highly inaccurate, but Japanese tend to do it. And so you have to talk about how things like sending nonverbal messages will probably not be picked up very effectively by people from outside Japan. And even inside Japan, I ask them, how effective is using that in a meeting? And they go, not so effective. So, but Japan really unique cross-cultural components. Everybody knows honne and tatemae, your true feelings versus your public position. But nemawashi is one that's really important in meetings, building a consensus before you actually start the meeting so everybody knows what's coming and
Mm,
there's conflict. Everybody knows what the decision is before the meeting. Well, when you
yeah.
go to country, the purpose of the meeting is to make a decision in the meeting. It's a very different mindset of getting things done. Hierarchy, senpai, kohai, superior, subordinate, harage, belly talk, negotiating again, that's nonverbal message, feeling each other's hara, their belly, nonverbal, is using silence in
Mm,
negotiations, which is very different in my country, the United States. Silence is seen as half empty. In Japan, it's seen as half full. So there's just a litany of cross-cultural things that are very, very different, and we were training them how to do what's called a style shift, which is to change from, for example, being indirect to direct, to change from being group-oriented to individual-oriented. Not to say that what you're doing is wrong, but that it's probably more
yeah.
effective to shift your style in another cultural context. So I did that quite a lot. We were doing every week. We were in the training room I did that for 3 years. Then I left and went back to the States for a reason. I wrote a book about it. That I'll tell you about that a little later. Then I came back to Japan in '93 and I worked for a British training company called Canning, which is still in existence. It's based in Tokyo, I believe. And it's a British training company doing more or less the same thing, but getting into business communication and business skills,
Mm,
presentation, negotiation, meeting skills, email writing skills. I did that for 3.5 years. And then I decided after that, I wasn't growing anymore. Nobody around me was teaching me anything. I wasn't learning anymore. So I said, look, I've been doing this for 7 or 8 years. I'm just going to go out on my own, give it a go. And,
mm,
tough in the beginning.
yeah.
You starve in the beginning because it's hard work. But every year
Ah,
got better. I got more and more clients. And one thing led to another. I did the TV show on NHK. Then once I was on NHK and I was a Gaijin, a famous person, that credibility was golden to do other things in
Mhm.
Japan. One of the things I did was continue the training world, but go into something that used my brain a lot more, which was media and crisis training. So
Ah,
what that involves is through PR agencies, they want you to work with their executives, the client executives, to make sure that when they go on TV or they do something in front of the media, they don't make mistakes. And, if
mm,
you say something wrong about a financial report as a CFO, your stock can tank. You lose
yeah.
$1 billion in a minute. So I was working with high level people, the
Mhm.
presidents, CEOs, ambassadors, public officials, um, billionaires. I had a couple of billionaire clients on my own, which was really interesting. And I got to travel all over the world. My business shifted from primarily Japanese work to all over the world, Middle East,
Oh, oh,
Europe, North America, all throughout Asia, India, China, Vietnam,
ah,
Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia. It was fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
I see. So your clientele were not just Japanese people; they were global, essentially,
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah,
I see.
they were. And some contracts were one-offs. Some of them were ongoing. I had a couple of contracts. One with an insurance group out of Singapore that I would do 30 trainings a year for them
Ah,
because they had different people in different departments that needed to engage the media and they needed to be trained. So I developed my own strategy, my own style, my own techniques for doing that. When you're sitting with a CEO, think about it, right? CEO of a huge company, who gets to sit with them for 2 hours? Nobody,
mm,
unless
right.
you're in a board meeting, right? But
Mm.
I was the PR department would book me for up to 2 hours with these people, and I had to make sure that they wouldn't walk out and leave me after 1 minute. So I always made them fail in the beginning. And they would do the discovery of like, why did I say that? And I would say, yeah, let's try that again, kind of thing. And I would build them up. I
Oh,
would tear them down in order to build them up. And basically,
okay.
it was behavioral change, is what I was engaging in. But it was through self discovery and some techniques that I use. I still do that. And I really love that work. It's quite interesting because I learn a lot. And every person is a different personality and a different background, and I've got a limited time to turn them around. So I really enjoy that. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. Let maybe maybe focus a little bit more on Japan here.
Sure.
One thing, when something goes wrong, when a company is obviously at fault, and the chief executives line up in front of the cameras and they bow and they say, "Oh, moshi arimasen deshita," and which means, of course, I'm so sorry.
I have no
Eh,
excuse.
Yeah, you have no excuse, but at the same time, it always seems very forced. And I mean, sometimes the contrition can seem sincere, but rarely, in my opinion. Were you coaching Japanese executives
Oh,
to
yes.
do that? Okay,
Yeah.
and now does it
Well,
differ
let me
between
add a
y
comment on that. I coined the phrase in 2017, empty bow,
ah,
because if you've talked about, there was like Kobe Steel had a 50-year scandal where administration after administration, they falsified data for 50 years. So when they go in front of the media and they do a bow, Moshiwake gozaimasen, we had no excuse. Come on, who believes
yeah,
that? It went on for
eh,
50 years. So that's
yeah.
what I call empty bow for. Some of the bows are really sincere in certain instances, and it's expected cross culturally to do that. But a lot of them, I would be curious to know if a lot of young Japanese take it seriously. I mean, the older Japanese were like,
Mm,
arigatou gozaimasu. But the young Japanese are probably like, "Pff, you know, why
yeah.
did it go years, right?" So I coined that phrase and I use it um,
Mm.
on certain occasions. Yeah. So I
So
don't.
how would
I,
you the
I teach Japanese how to bow. I'm not
well, right.
like. do that. They're Japanese, they know how to do it. But I look at everything. I look at the visual and the verbal. I look at the how are they dressed. I look at the room. Like even here,
Mm.
people talking to you, but I looked at multiple angles during the day today, and I looked at lighting, and I decided this was the best angle for the room I'm going to do this in. And I looked at my shirt. I'm wearing a blue shirt, which is the color you're supposed to wear for the media, not white and not black. I shaved
Oh,
before on. I mean, everything. I'm practicing what I preach, right?
well, I better read some of those books then. All right. So
Yeah,
I'm curious. That good segue though. Oh, yeah, you're not going to teach the Japanese how to bow, but I imagine some of your clients, or quite a few, were non-Japanese people operating in Japan
right,
that were in charge of large corporations, for example.
right.
How would you counsel them to be sincere and apologize in a situation like that?
Well, before you get to that point, you got to look at things like who is the person speaking. So just because it's a foreign company and the president is a foreigner, a non-Japanese, is he or she the best person to do it? I don't know. Let's look.
Mm,
I was in a situation with another insurance company where the president was from India and the translator interpreter for him was from Switzerland, and it was a guy. So we've got an Indian CEO and a Swiss interpreter. I said, no, this is not going to work. Why is it not going to work? Because the Japanese are going to look at the Swiss interpreter and go like, wow, how did he learn Japanese? 彼はすごく上手ですね. And he becomes the story, not the
yeah.
president. So you got
Mm,
who's doing what and what makes sense. So it's better to replace that Swiss guy with a Japanese woman with gray hair who's like 50.
mm,
That's pretty much the kind of thing I would advise. And then you work on messaging. You work on
yeah.
what they're trying to say, how are they trying to say it, how long are they speaking, are they talking too much, does the message hit the target, are they going off track? I mean, those are the kinds of things I work on. Yeah.
And what about in terms of the actual messaging? Let's give a hypothetical situation where the company was clearly at fault. Of course, a Westerner might not admit fault for all sorts of reasons, maybe legal reasons, but at the same time, they want to be sincere and apologize. Would, maybe it depends on the situation, but would you generally advise, well, if you're in Japan, do as the Japanese do and try and mimic a Japanese response?
Well, it depends on who the target market for the message is.
Mm,
If the target market is Japanese, yes, that would make. But if the
mm,
target market is actually not really Japan, but back home in XYZ country, maybe we
yeah.
need, you've got to look at the overall strategy of what they're trying to do, not just what they're saying. Once you have the strategy down pat, then you craft the messages to hit that target. You know, the problem with most non-Japanese and Japanese speakers in the media is they talk too much. They just keep
Mm,
going. And if Mark, if you look at a clip in a newspaper, let's say the New York Times, and you got a quote, how long is that quote?
yeah. Short.
It,
Mm,
it's a sentence, maybe two. So if you're going to do a press conference for an hour and you're talking for an hour and the media gets all of that, the media gets to decide what they use, not you.
mm,
So
true.
you've got to train them to say less because less is more, right?
Mm,
And repeat messages that you want to be inculcated and don't go off track. Somebody asks you a question that has no relationship to what you want to talk about, don't spend time on it. Just because
mm,
they ask you doesn't mean you want to talk about it. The question is not important, the answer is. The message is.
mm.
You can't ignore the
So,
question, but there's techniques that you can use to acknowledge that the question was asked and then change the topic, right? You've got to
essentially deflect.
Sure. But look at Donald Trump right now. He's in the middle of a lot of hornet's nests, right? Of many of his own doing. And he's a master at deflection. So he talks about the infinity pool or what's it called? What's it called with all the problems he's had in
Yeah,
DC?
the reflecting
Talking
pool. Yeah.
about the airplane, or he starts talking about the ballroom. So instead of talking about the war, he starts talking about the ballroom. I mean, he deflects. It doesn't work anymore. Everyone knows
Yeah.
what he's doing. But plus, he does another thing that's a cardinal sin in media is he lies. He
Yeah.
lies
Well,
through his teeth. Terrible strategy, really bad strategy.
so
And
once
also,
again, bringing this back to Japan, and maybe you're familiar with this, but just recently, of course, down where I am in Kyushu, there was a large earthquake in
I,
Kumamoto.
yeah,
And kind of a side story to this is, of course, that explosion, the gas explosion in the
yeah,
Aeon supermarket. And what seems to be somewhat of a scandal is the fact that the company asked their employees to vacate, but then there's some question about, well, why did so many of them go back in and then end up being killed? And it's I've been watching to see how the top management of Aeon has been treating this, and I don't know, it's still a little early, but it seems like they're kinda hemming and hawing and not really being clear on this, but I don't know if you've kept up with this story, but what's your assessment?
well, I haven't studied this particular crisis, so I'm not in a position to really comment on it. But I would agree that most times in a crisis, Japanese are at their worst because it takes time for Japanese to form a consensus on what their strategy is, and in a crisis, you don't have time. So I see this a lot in Japan, not only in Japan, but a lot in Japan. You got to take control immediately, and you've got to be honest and transparent.
Okay.
And if you made a mistake, you've got to say it in a way that hopefully doesn't get you into a million lawsuits. But
Mm,
transparency is the best strategy. Honesty is the best strategy. It's true. It's absolutely true. You know.
mm. Yeah, well, we'll see how this particular story plays out, but yeah, that would be a good case study. Hey, I'm curious, given the fact that you were in Japan at this time, how did you assess Carlos Ghosn and
Oh,
his approach to the media?
that was a very interesting one. Excuse me, my throat's a little
Mm,
verklempt. Um, he was a masterful message deliverer. He was very, very experienced. I never had a chance to work with him. I worked with his company, training some of their people, but I never had a chance to work with him. Um, I think, I think what he did was necessary for his future. You're talking
mm.
through the musical instrument case, or you're talking about just in general.
No, before that, I mean, how he communicated the facts that Nissan was totally in trouble and his plan to fix things. And then I know things went off the rails, so to speak, afterwards, but just in general, how is he managing the media? He seemed to be pretty masterful at it.
General, he was very good. He was very, very good. There were times where he wasn't, but generally he knew what he was doing. He was strategic at all times. He stayed in that position, correct me if I'm wrong, for almost 20 years. That's a
Yeah,
long CEO or president to be in that
that's true.
he might have stayed too long. And of course he was set up to fail. He was the fall guy for what was going on with French Renault. It's a very common case. But now he's a free man. Should he have done what he did? What he did was
Sort of.
illegal. I'm not in a
Yeah.
position to say. I don't judge what these people do. It's not my job. My job is to give them, insights and suggestions on how to get their messages across impactfully. That's what I do.
Mm. So
Sometimes
when you were
I
counts
rarely, sorry, Mark, I rarely manipulate messages coming from the PR department of a large corporation. Most PR people in these companies know what they're doing and they know what they want to say. Once in a while, if I see something that just does not work, I'll say something. But that's not mostly my job. My job is not to craft the messages. My job is to help them deliver them effectively.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. So were Japanese clients primarily hiring you to counsel their senior executives on business communication skills relative to communicating to the rest of the world as opposed to within Japan?
Yeah, mainly. So I didn't train in Japanese. Um, First of all, there are a lot of Japanese native speakers that are much better than myself. And there's a plethora of them. I know just in Tokyo alone, a lot of these PR agencies have Japanese media trainers. So I didn't even touch that market.
Mm,
I thought niche in the non-Japanese or the Japanese that needed to use English networks. And I did a lot of work for the different ministries in the Japanese government. The one I'm most proud of was during Fukushima. I volunteered through the Prime Minister's office and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to work for 3 weeks with their spokespersons on delivering messages during the crisis. I didn't want to get paid for it. It was my way of giving back to Japan. And I gave very honest feedback. Some of them, their spokespersons were fantastic, but most of them needed a lot of work. And I think I improved their English delivery and their impact. Yeah, that
Oh,
was
that's interesting.
that was really rewarding, actually.
And did you work with any of the executives at TEPCO, the power
No,
company? Ah,
no, I did.
okay. They probably could have used your services, I think.
Yes, they probably could have. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow, very interesting. And so when you counsel your clients on such a topic, what are the most common pitfalls that they experience that you need to call out?
Could you rephrase the question? I'm not quite following you.
Sure. And I have a feeling you were just manipulating me. Now I'm kidding you. But yeah, so I'm kidding. Uh, when you're, for example, knowing what you know about based on your vast experience in Japan and how Japanese executives would address a Japanese audience, but maybe a little less familiar with how to be effective addressing a global audience, what are some of the most common things that they might normally do without being counseled not to do so that you could help them with?
Well, I already spoke about a couple of them. One is speaking too much. The other one is not using the body language that's appropriate. Most Japanese don't use
Ah,
at the right time. I would work with them on that. I would work on them on making sure that they repeated their key messages multiple times during the interview. That's another thing that most Japanese I found to not do. Those are some of the top things. Yeah.
oh, those are great. Hey, we have a question. So thank you very much, first of all. And I want to encourage everyone else to use the chat functionality. So let's read the question. You can be quote unquote asking for a friend. So we won't read your name unless you want us to. All right. David, how much of effective crisis communication is based on fundamental proficiency versus crisis specific skills? Oh, that's a
Is
loaded
that
question.
they're talking about proficiency in language? Is that the proficiency?
Well, it's not clear. Maybe you could add that, but let's assume just general proficiency of communication skills.
Well, I think it's a combination of language, cross-cultural adaptation, and crisis skills techniques. I think it's all three, actually.
Mm,
It's not
okay.
a package.
All right. Good. Well, I hope that answered the question. And yeah, by the way, the person who asked the question did want to focus more on language in particular.
Well, it's important. You don't want to put someone in an English press conference that can't speak English.
Yes. Okay.
You don't have to go to graduate school to understand that. But at the same time, I've seen speakers that are not completely fluent in English, but are very impactful. Akio Morita of
Mm,
Sony, anybody remember him? He
yeah.
wasn't, I would say, a really fluent speaker of English, but he had a good style and people liked him and they listened to
Mm,
his. So that's an example of you don't have to be completely fluent to be effective. And the other thing is,
mm,
if you're in Japan and you're a non-Japanese speaking Japanese to the media, that's a
mm,
tricky thing
mm,
because unless you are really, really, really fluent, I don't advise it. Not only are there grammatical errors and punctuation errors and things like that, but Japanese are going to focus on your mistakes instead of your strengths and what the content of the message is. So I advise using interpreters. There's a couple reasons for that. One is you get more time to think. So there's two kinds of interpretation. There's doji tsuyaku, which is simultaneous. And then there's conference interpreting, which means you speak and then the interpreter speaks and then you speak and the interpreter speaks. Well, both of them can be effective, but I really advise people to use conference interpreting because it gives you a lot more time to think. When they're interpreting what you said, you've got time to think about what you want to do next. So there's strategies. Even I've seen really fluent non-Japanese speakers speaking Japanese, but they won't do it in front of the media because they know that it buys them time to use interpreters. Yeah,
oh, that's fascinating advice. Huh.
so
I hadn't
it's
thought of that.
all strategy, right? It's all strategic.
Yeah.
So
Huh. And are there any non-Japanese people active in the business world that, particularly during the time that you were here, that stood out as being just absolutely masters of communication besides Carlos Ghosn, that you might want to showcase?
I don't want to highlight any particular person.
Okay.
The Japanese love certain non-Japanese because of what they do, not necessarily what they say. Like some of the baseball players, you know, um, they didn't speak Japanese, but they were loved by the Japanese.
Yeah.
So, it just depends. I can't think of a spokesperson in particular that's. I mean, there's fluent speakers that are on TV all the time, like Dave Spector.
Yeah,
Eh,
right.
He's incredible.
Mhm.
Not only because of his background and his language proficiency, but he just knows how this place works. He knows how
Mhm.
Japan. There were some others, Kent Gilbert was very good in his day, Kent Delicott
Oh, yeah.
day. But their TV personalities, not necessarily,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a little bit different. Yeah.
Alright, well, how about maybe pivoting a little bit, let's focus more on Nissan again. The current head of Nissan is, uh, I believe he's from Spain, and he's got a financial background, so definitely more of a, bean counter perspective, but he's got a pretty difficult task ahead of him, just like Carlos Ghosn had. I don't know if you've been keeping up with how he's doing, but he seems to be slowly but surely making a comeback, or helping the company slowly get back on track.
I'm not in a position to comment. I haven't watched what he's doing. I'm not involved
Okay.
with Nissan at all anymore. And,
Oh,
I spend my time working on current clients and what their issues are. I mean, I stay up on current events, obviously, like everybody else, but I can't study every single crisis.
yeah,
There's a
okay.
guy, there's a guy, a non-Japanese. His name is Igor Prusa, who's an academic who studies scandals and studies crisis.
Oh,
Quite a prominent force in Japan. I really like him. I've met him and had coffee with him. Very, very sharp guy. And so that's the kind of person that is watching scandals all the time and analyzing each scandal. I don't have time to do all that. When a
I can
client
understand.
hires, the client hires me for a crisis, I've got to focus on what that is involved. And they're very complicated, some of them. Multiple
Okay.
moving parts, multiple countries. Some of these crises are global and for example, they start in Japan. But look at the Gulf of Mexico oil leak about 15, 20 years ago. Remember,
Mm,
when the sun went down, the oil is still leaking. So
yeah.
you train from the North American time zone to the Asian time zone, then the European time zone, all over again. So every team had to take over in terms of manage messages when the time zones changed. The sun went down and it rose in another place. So those
Oh,
are complex crises. Yeah.
okay. Hey, we have another question, and this has to do with counseling for politicians. So the question is, did you ever work with prime ministers? I remember back in the day, Abe-san speaking at an international conference, maybe the UN, thinking he really needed someone like you.
Mm.
It was hard to see that he was an actual leader. Did his language and speaking skills basically cause him to not do so well?
I never worked with any prime ministers. I worked with the corporate communications or the communications office of the prime minister's residence, and I worked with the chief spokespersons there many times. Um, I found Prime Minister Abe to be a powerful spokesperson. I liked his style because it appealed to the Japanese, which was his main audience. I heard him speak in Tokyo a month before he was assassinated. He was on stage with a couple of other people, and I found him very effective. Um, I didn't study his technique in overseas, but generally, I find prime ministers in Japan don't style shift very effectively to accommodate a new. When they're at the G7 or the G8, they're sort of on their own. They're like an appendage. Nobody pays much attention to them except the Japanese. Um, Ryotaro Hashimoto, when he was prime minister,
Mm,
that 30 years ago, I think. I thought he was very good. He went to Texas and he put on a cowboy hat and he was switching around and so that kind of worked really, really well. So there are some Japanese prime ministers have done pretty well, but most of them are pretty um, non-distinct. Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of prime ministers and a very distinct one, the current prime minister, Takaichi,
Mhm.
maybe you could give us the perspective from your position in the United States now, but one aspect of the way she handles herself that seems to be pretty critically assessed here in Japan is the smile. It's kind of like it's almost like an insincere type of smile I've heard on the media. I don't know if that comes across in the United States or what your impression is, but if I were someone like you advising her to change her or pivot her style a little bit, that would be something I'd work on. But what do you think?
Well, in defense of her, and I've never spoken to her, of course, I've never worked with her. I think she is sincere. She uses her smile as a communication mode. She doesn't smile when she's talking about something serious, like the flooding yesterday in Chiba, which was horrific.
Mm,
I don't. She's smiling when she's engaged in the media, so she can be very serious when she needs to be. But her smile is a social lubricant, and I think it has great value. Should she use it all the time in all instances? Of course not. That's not a good
yeah.
idea.
Well, maybe this is, hmm, I don't know. I've gotten the impression that particularly when she's addressing other politicians or she's arguing or, putting on the act of arguing in the diet, she kind of, it's almost like a smirk smile when she's criticizing someone.
You know, I haven't,
Maybe I'm off on that.
I haven't really studied what she's doing enough to make a comment on it. I'm just
Okay.
giving sort of off the cuff impression, but she must be doing something right because she's prime minister. So
Well, true, of course. That's true.
that
Well,
proves
let's
in the
get back to the main topic here. I'm curious, you've already alluded to several of these issues, but when foreigners who are operating here in Japan are working with the Japanese media, what are some of the biggest things that you would counsel them to change or to be cognizant of to make sure that they don't go down the wrong rabbit hole, for example?
well, again, why is a non-Japanese dealing with the Japanese
Mm.
media? First
Yeah,
question.
mm,
And if they're doing it, are they doing it in English or Japanese or another language? I don't know.
yeah, yeah,
Um, there's nothing standard that I can come up with that I see across the board that people make mistakes or do well. Everyone's
mm,
quite different. Everyone has their own different style and experience. Um, let's see. I think in general, speaking slowly is mandatory for Japanese, especially in a crisis situation. A lot of non-Japanese speak too fast. They're nervous. It's like a nervous gesture. That's maybe the primary thing that I think I see across the board mostly, and tell people to slow down. Uh, that's what I think is pretty pretty much reality for a lot of people. But Japanese tend to be risk averse and less proactive. And I think you know there's a time and a place to be proactive and time and a place to not be. And when you're in front of the camera and you're in front of the media, you've got to use your time judiciously. You've got to really be strategic and execute in a brief amount of time to get what you want to say across. Because at the end of the day, the journalist gets to edit what they want to do. Like if
yeah,
you start an interview and you say something stupid, like I don't know what you would say. But you say something that you don't think is going to be recorded or used, and they end up using it. Well, you said it. It's too late. So
yeah.
you got to be cognizant of what you're saying at all times, every single thing you say. Yeah.
And how about your advice as it relates to, for example, not a live TV or
Mm.
video connection, but more on the written word, like a written uh, piece that's being done? Is there any other specific advice you would provide?
Well, that kind of media is wonderful because you have a lot of time to decide before you push the send button what you want to say. Um, but again, if that's a thought leadership piece or if that's an editorial about something, I think it needs to be very specific about what you're doing based on what you're trying to achieve. It comes back to your
Yeah.
goals.
Okay.
But I think one thing that's very clear in Japan and related to the media is protecting relationships, protecting
Mm,
relationship with media, protecting relationships with your colleagues, saving face is
mm,
fundamentally important in Japan. It's less important in America. I mean, people don't save face all the time. They badmouth their competitors and their people they're running against in office. Japanese don't do that. So, it's counterculture.
Mm.
Um, so I think also there's the importance of gaiatsu, outside pressure.
Yeah.
Um, and when you're engaged with the media, the spokesperson, has pressure from all kinds of influences and sources, and you don't know what they've got to do and why they've got to do it.
Mm.
At the end of the day, that's if you're looking at somebody that's asked a question and they don't answer the question, that tells me that they didn't acknowledge the question very well before they decided what they wanted to change in terms of topic. So one of the things I put people on is to never ignore the question before you give your answer. Don't change the topic.
Mm.
Don't do black and white. Do black, gray, and white. You need the gray
Mm.
to transition to what you want to talk about. Yeah.
So that you made me think about how Japanese politicians and, for example, a prime minister would address a press conference and the questions that come from reporters. And it seems so staged always here in Japan. I
Yeah.
mean, this would be in Japanese. And it seems in many cases they're already given the answer, the questions ahead of time, and they've got pre-prepared comments just to
Mhm.
read off.
Sometimes that's true. Yeah.
Well, it seems like it's kinda often, and I just it doesn't seem like they're speaking off the cuff, and it doesn't seem as sincere and honest to me. Maybe I'm just,
Well, it comes
skewed,
out
but
the social norm of predictability. It influences the process of engaging the media. I think there are plenty of journalists, increasingly so in Japan, that are willing to deru kui wa utareru, be the nail that sticks up in order to try to get hammered down. But you don't. I'll tell you a story. There was a press conference a long time ago, and everybody in the room was told that what is being stated is off the record. But the foreign journalist stood in the door between the room and the next room. So if he's standing in the doorway, is he in the room where it's off the record, or is he outside the room where it's on the record? And he decided to say, I'm in the second room, so it's on the record and I'm going to report this. Well, he did, and nobody talked to him in the future. You know,
Ah,
you've
okay.
got to play the game the way the Japanese want to play it. If you want to be involved in press conferences and being called as somebody that they rely on and they talk to. But at the same time, I in Japan, it's very common to spend time with a journalist for 30, 45, 60 minutes. They want a lot of background information. And that's part of what your job is to fill them in, help them do their job better. But at the same time, if you're dealing in a crisis where you don't want to spend a lot of time with the media, you want to just do for 5 or 10 minutes and leave, then you just control the situation to, oh, I didn't realize it, but I've got an appointment in 10 minutes. Is 10 minutes okay for this interview? Would that work with you? Okay, great. Let's go. Yeah, let's start. Just control it,
Ah,
you know.
hmm. Okay, well, it sounds easy. Alright,
It just depends how you do it. Um,
okay.
so yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't think Japan's changed much in terms of the way it manages the media and the way it uses the media. Um, and I don't think it's going to change. But social media and
Mm,
instant media forcing some change, and
yeah,
they have to deal with it. You know,
absolutely.
not sure
So
they
we have
like.
another question.
Yeah.
We have another question, very good. Alright, what is one of your clients most surprised of taking him or her seemingly hopeless situation and doing an excellent job. So, in other words, I guess a comeback, or when you in a situation when you advised on it during a crisis that you were able to solve or help solve for their client.
Well, I'll go back again to the Fukushima experience. They were live press conferences. I was taking notes on all of them, and some of these spokespersons were laughing off camera, and the camera would catch them laughing while talking about Fukushima and a nuclear reactor melting. Um, Not looking prepared, disheveled, hair isn't combed, they're not wearing the right clothes. They spoke too much, they spoke too softly, those kinds of things. I could see that I had an impact over time on that. It comes down to training. It really is a training issue. It's a skill development issue, and you've got to learn how to do it just like you've got to learn how to play golf. You some people are pretty innately skilled, maybe from watching the media over time. They got an innate sense of how to do it. But even then, in a crisis situation, it's a different than a normal,
Yeah.
product delivery. Like we've got a new product. Look at our new drink. That's an easy thing to promote. There's no pressure. But when you've got journalists, raising their hands, the Japanese journalists in a crisis are as nasty as anybody else in the world. You know,
Yeah.
they they camp out at the president's house and try to get him doing something. Get him come out, with like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what they'll print. They'll print the president doing like these hiding. That's what they're looking for. So you've got to be ready for an ambush at all times. That kind of.
That's good advice. All right, very good. Well, not just ambushes, but what kind of advice would you provide to fellow foreigners working here in Japan and how to build a successful career?
Well, that's a big question. Well, I'm going to tell you a story. It's one of the things you advertised I would talk about. Like we've only got 10 minutes left, so I want to spend some time on it. When I first came to Japan, I told you I worked for Fuji Xerox as a cross-cultural
Mm.
trainer. At the time, Fuji Xerox was the premier joint venture in Japan with Fuji Photo Film and Xerox of Britain. And they developed this department to do cross-cultural training for profit. Of course, they wanted to make money. They hired a bunch of foreigners. I was one of them. And one day, the president, Yotaro Kobayashi, who was really, really famous, completely fluent in English, British English, and he went to school at Wharton in Pennsylvania. He came to our office and everybody went to go hear him speak, but the foreigners were not allowed to hear him speak. So here we are teaching cross cultural communication and how to integrate, but the foreigners aren't allowed to go hear the global president speak. And I was really furious at it. I said, "What hypocrisy are we dealing with? This is outrageous." I completely was young and inexperienced and naive, and I overreacted. But what I did was, I wrote a letter to the president's office, and that caused quite a storm. And it turned out that the president's office sent somebody to interview the foreign staff, but it turned into a witch hunt against me. And I was ostracized in the company and I basically ended up having to quit. And then
Oh,
it got because I wrote a book about the experience and I decided to tell the company that I was writing it to protect myself. Well, they didn't like that because it would embarrass the president and embarrass the company. And long story short, I wrote a book about it. It's called Forever Foreign. It's completely true. I
what is
wrote
it?
I wrote it in 1991 and I put it away for 30 years because I didn't want to I wanted to continue to work in Japan and not mess up my career. And I finally published it in self-published it in 2021. But what happened was I ended up leaving Japan. I was followed on a plane to Minneapolis and walked around the airport. And I left Japan for 3 years. And after 3 years, when the book was done, I went back in 1993 and I wrote a letter to the president's office saying, "Hey, how are you? I'm coming to Japan. Wonder if you have time to meet," just to see if it was okay. Not to meet him, but it was okay to come back. And the president's office wrote back and said, "He wishes you a good trip." So I knew it was okay to come back, and I left it. But it was an extraordinary experience. And one of the things I learned is Japan is a very complicated place, like any society would be. And there's a lot about cross-cultural communication I didn't understand and cultural norms. So what would I advise people to do? Learn Japanese
Yeah.
and learn his culture through language and other forms. I wrote an article on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, something to the effect of, "You don't have to be a Japan specialist to specialize in Japan."
Mm.
And by that, what I basically mean is, I was a specialist. I had masters in Japanese policy studies. People study and become specialists in XYZ at master's degree or PhD. But I think now you can self-study on your own and learn a lot. And I think people are advised to do that. You see all these YouTubers going and causing trouble in the trains and doing
Yeah.
everything to get clicks and make some money. The damage those guys do. Uh, then the movement of the anti-foreigner movement in Japan, I've never seen anything like it in my entire 40 years there. It's really actually.
Yeah.
And I think respect for cultural norms is mandatory. And the only way you can do that is to learn what the norms are. So that's the number one advice. If you want to do business in Japan or with Japanese, study, study, study. Learn about how things are done. Ask a lot of questions. Yeah.
Very good. Well, I have a follow-up to what you just explained. That was a great story, by the way. But just a quick shout out to everyone. We still have a few minutes left. If you have any more questions, we do have a question. Are you a Minnesotan? No. David is from Colorado, where he lives now. But in any case, my follow-up question is, all right, in all of the time that has passed since that experience that you had at Fuji Xerox,
Right.
looking back at this, given your current position and experience, how would you have handled the situation differently?
I wouldn't have done anything.
Oh,
I'm
why?
not I'm not going to change the company and I'm not going to change Japan. So I just left I would have just said, okay, I'm done here. I've had enough. Instead fight it. Although I think by fighting it, I caused a kerfuffle in the upper level management. I really did. I became really well known really quickly as a child.
True.
They
Can
wanted,
imagine.
CYA cover their ass. But I was another thing I was thinking about in a little bit of a different topic, but there's a job shortage, a labor shortage in Japan. And I was looking the other day at hikikomori, the people that stay at
Mm,
home. Do you know how many hikikomori there are in Japan, according to this statistic that I read?
probably
1,
quite a few.
1.46 million.
What?
2%,
That many?
2% of the Japanese population is hikikomori. They rarely leave their house. They don't have a job and their parents take care of them. And some of them are 30, 40, 50 years old now. And their parents
Um,
think about if these hikikomori could be somehow transformed into normal people and put into the workforce, how that would radically change the
mm,
dynamic of labor shortage.
true.
I just thought of that the other day. It's something I don't know. It's off topic, but Japan is really transforming itself into a lot of uh, new and interesting things. And I do hope that that non-Japanese are accepted and that more and more non-Japanese move to Japan and stay, even though the permanent residency is a quite complicated thing right now. I was a
Mm,
permanent resident for 13 years. The only reason I cut it last year because at my age, with inheritance coming, I don't want to pay any inheritance
mhm,
to the Japanese government.
yeah, I
That's what
understand.
I really disliked. You know,
Yeah.
your father or your mother never lived in Japan, never worked in Japan, never made money in Japan. But if you are a permanent resident in Japan, they can tax you on that money at up to 55%.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm done. I'm done. I've had 40 years in Japan. I loved it. But now I'm 65 years old and I'm moving toward retirement and I need that money.
Ah,
I'm not
okay.
not
Well, you
giving
could always come visit Japan on a
that's it.
tourist visa. Yeah,
Come and visit. But
very
that
good.
brings up another issue is, a lot of old timers stay there because it's a wonderful place to live, you know,
Yeah.
great place to retire. Um, and I've thought twice about what I did. Was it the right thing to do? But it was for me for now. So,
Okay. So what else? Tell us in the remaining time that we have left, what are your future plans?
well, I just finished a film. It's a family film that I wrote about my mother and her brother. Well, I didn't write it, but we made it. Of my mother and her brother's parents, my grandparents' journey to Auschwitz. They were Jews.
Ooh.
My grandmother was killed in a gas chamber, and my grandfather survived hard labor. And so we made we made a movie um, talking about that journey and then their post life, and then how they educated
Hmm.
new generations about the Holocaust. So that's one project I'm just finishing up. But I'm going to continue to do more of what I've been doing and look for interesting projects. I want to get involved in the Democratic Party again. I did it in 2018
Hmm.
here, but I want to use my skills to help the Democrats win because I'm not a fan of what's going on right now.
Well, more power to you. On the same page. Terrific. Well, I tell you what, we want to be cognizant of everyone's time. David, thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I learned quite a bit, many great sound bites, so I'm looking forward to sharing that. And as I mentioned, thank you everyone who participated. We had many questions, so that's terrific. We will be putting out the full recording within 24, 36 hours here, so you can go back and listen or pass this along to one of your friends. Please do so on both Substack and YouTube. Plus, we will be showcasing a few of the highlights of the interview, and there are many over the next few months. So thank you very much. David, you wanted to say a few final words to everyone?
Well, I just wish everyone a lot of good luck in what they're doing, continued success. And thank you, Mark, for your time. It's been very interesting.
Great. All right. Well, have a good rest of your evening back. And got very positive comments coming in. Thank you, David and Mark. Thank you. Great interview and questions. Great. Well, we're pleased to know about that. All right. Well, have a good evening in Colorado, and we're going to get started with the rest of our day here in Japan.
Thanks again. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
お疲れ様でした。
Thanks for watching and or listening to another story from the Read My Lips series of podcasts on Real Gaijin. Tell us what you think and be sure to tune in again next time.